The opulent dining hall of Lord Armand de Vaux echoed with the murmur of conversation and the clink of silverware. Noble guests from neighboring domains sat in hushed reverence around a long oak table laden with the finest foods Burgundy had to offer. Yet all eyes were drawn to Armand himself, seated at the head of the table, his face illuminated by the flickering light of a dozen candles. Even in the midst of merriment, there was a palpable awareness of the peculiar stillness that emanated from the host, a quietness that seemed to swallow sound itself. At 33 years old, Armand's appearance was a study in contrasts. His attire, a tapestry of youthful finery and somber decay, spoke of a lineage grappling with a curse that transcended mere mortality. Tonight, however, his usual pallor was accentuated by a deep burgundy cloak fastened with a silver clasp. Beneath it, his doublet and hose, tailored in the height of fashion, hinted at the nobility that flowed through his veins. Yet these finer garments could not entirely conceal the telltale signs of his family's affliction. As he lifted his gloved hands to partake in the feast, a collective gasp escaped the assembled company. For though summertime in Burgundy was known for its balmy days, Armand's hands were encased in thick leather, the knuckles protruding like gnarled roots beneath the surface. Across from him sat Estienne, his most trusted steward, his weathered face a mask of concern. In the grand tapestry of events that had unfolded over the past few months, Etienne bore the scars of worry etched deep into his brow. I'd served the de Vaux line for decades, witnessing the gradual erosion of his lord's health. And tonight, amidst the fanfare of the visiting nobles, he saw in Armand's eyes a reflection of the abyss that seemed to consume him. As the evening wore on, whispers circulated throughout the hall, weaving tales of the Lord de Vaux's strange ailment. Some spoke in hushed tones of an ancient curse, while others dismissed it as a rare disease, one that had befallen the nobleman in the solitude of his chambers. But Armand remained impassive, his gaze fixed on the flickering candle flames, lost in the labyrinth of his thoughts. Suddenly, as if pulled from a deep slumber, Armand raised his head, his eyes blazing with newfound determination. With a voice that resonated with power, he addressed his guests, cutting through the tapestry of deceit that had shrouded the truth. Tonight, he declared, I shall unveil the enigma that has haunted my lineage for generations. A hush fell over the room as all eyes turned to their host, captivated by the fervor in his voice. With the support of Etienne, and armed with the fragmented records of his family's past, Armand delved deeper into the annals of his lineage. He uncovered a legacy intertwined with whispers of dark pacts and unsettling rituals that bordered on the heretical. In the scriptorium of his ancestral home, surrounded by centuries-old documents, Armand pieced together fragments of his family's history, each page revealing a more unsettling truth. The curse, he discovered, was not merely a figment of imagination or a product of religious zealotry. It was a chilling reality that had seeped into the very foundations of his lineage. He learned of his great-grandfather, Lord de Vaux, who, in defiance of the Church's teachings, had hosted a lavish banquet during Lent, when an unnamed priest was denied entry for refusing to break his fast. He had cursed the family, dooming them to a fate worse than death. Generations had passed, and now Armand found himself grappling with the chilling consequences of that fateful decision. But as he delved deeper, he unearthed a secret that threatened to shake the foundations of his world. The curse, he realized, was not merely a punishment, but a pact, a macabre bargain struck by his ancestors, that had dire repercussions for their bloodline. With each passing day, Armand's resolve hardened into grim determination. He would not succumb to the curse that had haunted his family for so long. Instead, he vowed to confront it, to understand its origins, and ultimately to break its hold over the de Vaux name. And so, with the unwavering support of Etienne, and armed with the fragmented pieces of his family's past, Armand stepped into the shadows of his ancestral home, determined to uncover the truth, no matter how harrowing it might be. For he knew that only by confronting the darkness head-on could he hope to bring light back into the life of his family, and break the cycle of suffering that had endured for far too long. The wind outside Chateau de Vaux clawed at the shutters, rattling the panes like a skeleton drumming its fingers to be let in. But it wasn't the wind that stirred Armand from his sleep. He sat up in bed, his heart thudding against his ribs like a trapped bird. Nay, The room was dark, the only sound the groaning of the ancient house as it settled in the night. Had he dreamed? He couldn't be sure. Sleep had become a treacherous thing, filled with half-remembered images that clung to his mind like cobwebs. A long table set with candles and covered in food that might have been human viscera. A circle of hooded figures chanting in a language older than any he'd known. And then the face, man yet not quite. A skull stretched over his features, grinning toothlessly, and eyes like polished agates boring into his very soul. Fear, cold and clammy, tightened its grip on Armin's chest. Was this the price of the blood pact his ancestors had made? Had he been foolish to seek out its source, to bring it closer? Now his great-grandfather's warning echoed in his mind. To save the line, he must embrace the curse. But what did it mean to embrace the darkness? He had tried to bargain, to bind the affliction to his will, but something stronger than he was hungrier had taken hold. There was no rest while the thing stirred beneath the floorboards, no peace while it whispered in his dreams. He knew what he had to do, but how? As dawn bled into day, he summoned his physician. The man's face was pale, his eyes shadowed. Winter had been hard, and Armand knew the sickness that stalked the land was taking its toll. But he forced the worry from his mind. He needed a clear head that day. When the servants cleared away the breakfast dishes, he dismissed them all except for Etienne, who watched him with worried eyes. "Find me the spade we used in the crypt," Armand said, his voice hoarse from disuse. The younger man hesitated. "Master, surely that is not necessary," it is Armand said, meeting his gaze. "And bring a lantern, one that hangs from the hook in the hall. The largest we have." Once they were sure the servants had departed, Armand descended into the crypts. Etienne stumbled after him, his steps echoing in the vast space. "Master, perhaps you should not," he began, but Armand cut him off with a sharp look. At the far end, beside the eternal flame, Armand knelt beside the tomb of Geoffroy de Vaux. The stone was cold beneath his gloved hands. Yet he could have sworn he felt a tremor, a stirring. With shaking hands, he began to dig. The earth yielded easily, as if eager to release what had been buried within. Soon enough, the shovel struck something hard. Armand brushed away the dirt, revealing a wooden box bound with iron. He pried at the lid, and it creaked open, releasing a stench so foul it brought tears to his eyes. Within, wrapped in layers of rotted leather, lay a length of blackened chain. He lifted it out, surprised by its weight, and felt a sudden pull, as if some unseen force tugged at his soul. He blinked, and when he looked down, his fingers were slick with blood. From the moment that Armand unlocked the reliquary, everything changed. The storm outside intensified, as if the sky itself recoiled from the disturbance. The wind clawed at the chateau, rattling the shutters like a skeleton drumming its fingers against a tomb. Inside, the atmosphere shifted. In the grand hall, the flames of the braziers drooped, as if weary, and the shadows deepened in the corners. Even Etienne, usually so boisterous, was subdued. His face drained of color, his laughter silenced. He begged Armand to stay away from the reliquary, to let it rest, but Armand could not tear his gaze away. The warm glow emanating from the bone both beckoned and reassured him. It was a beacon in the gathering gloom, a silent promise in a world grown too quiet. So he stayed, and as the minutes ticked by, the whispers started. They slithered through the halls, weaving tales of a time long past. They spoke of shadows and secrets, of sacrifices made and bargains struck. They beckoned Armand deeper into the chateau's embrace, promising revelations that would shatter the boundaries between life and death. Fear pricked at him, icy fingers tracing paths down his spine, yet he pressed on, drawn by an insatiable curiosity. As the clock chimed midnight, the whispers crescendoed, and he knew he could not ignore them any longer. He found the crypt undisturbed, the air stagnant, the silence heavy with unspoken histories. But the deeper he descended, the more the whispers grew, becoming voices, voices laden with urgency, pleading, commanding. They urged him to continue, promising answers at the journey's end. At the bottom of the crypt, the air unexpectedly warmed, the frost on the walls melting, leaving behind damp patches and crumbling gargoyles. The sight both startled and fascinated him. With shaking hands, he pushed open the iron door, revealing a sight that stole his breath. was not a burial chamber he had expected, but a vast hall, richly decorated, lit by flickering oil lamps that hissed and spat, casting dancing shadows on the walls. In the center stood a long table crafted from black oak, polished to a sheen. Upon it lay a feast fit for royalty, yet untouched, as if laid out for a gathering that never came. Silver plates gleamed under crystal goblets, and the scent of spiced wine hung heavy in the air. But it was not the feast that held Armand captive. At the far end of the table, bathed in an ethereal glow, sat a single chair, and in it, swathed in darkness, a figure that seemed to beckon. With a jolt, Armand recognized the face leering from the shadows. Time had stripped away the layers of paint, exposing the cruel mirth in Geoffrey's eyes, the sneer twisting his lips. But there was something else, something alien and unsettling that clung to him like a shroud. As Armand stepped into the room, the whispers swelled, no longer a murmur, but a cacophony of voices, each vying for his attention. Each weaving tales of Geoffrey's rise and fall, his ambitions and his regrets, his triumphs and his defeats. They wove a tapestry of deceit, desperation, and damnation, drawing Armand deeper into the vortex of Geoffrey's tormented existence. He reached out a hand as if to steady himself, but it met only empty air. The voices swelled again, their pitch rising, their urgency growing. "Touch me," they hissed, "embrace me." But Armand recoiled, fear clutching at his throat. He understood then what these voices, what this presence meant. This was not just a ghost, but a prison, a gilded cage of pain and regret. And Geoffrey, he was not merely a specter, but a warning. With newfound resolve, Armand turned away, the voices fading into the echoing chambers of the crypt. He fled, not daring to look back, not daring to question, driven only by the desperate need to escape the clutches of the chateau and its spectral keeper. "Ah, well met, traveler. Care to warm yourself by our fire and rest a while? What tales would you hear? No. How about a scary story? Then come closer. Let me tell you about the curse of the hungry dead. In days gone by, in a realm not so unlike our own, there stood a venerable chateau. It was an ancient pile of stone and wood, its history as ingrained in its timbers as the rings of a tree. And yet within living memory, it had known better days. For in the recent past, it had been the home of a most courteous and generous noble named Armand de Vaux. But sadly, Paul had fallen over his household, for Armand's soul was bound to a terrible fate. See, he had uncovered an ancient evil in the depths of his home, a malevolent force that hungered always and demanded tribute or else. Ah, yes, the price of peace. The days that followed the encounter in the vault were measured not by the tolling of the chapel bell, but by the bone's presence in Armand's chamber. He could not set it aside for long. At times it lay inert, pale against the dark wood of his desk. At others it seemed to twitch, almost imperceptibly, as though longing for something it had once possessed. Sleep no longer brought rest. His dreams were soaked in moonlight and the sound of distant footsteps, circling always closer. Outside the winter deepened. The vineyards below the chateau lay entombed in ice, and the village kept to their hearths, speaking only in murmurs of the nobleman, whose shadow no longer stretched in daylight. Etienne alone remained by Armand's side, though his face grew gaunt, and his voice carried the tremor of one who had seen too much. On the eve of the year's final full moon, Armand called for him. "The choice is upon us," he said, though his gaze was fixed on the window where the moon silver began to seep through the frost. "The curse can be ended, but it requires a price I have no right to demand." Etienne did not ask what that price was. He knew. All who bore the name de Vaux carried the seed of the affliction. To spill the first blood of the line was to cut the thread from which their souls dangled. The night was deathly still when they descended to the old chapel at the base of the hill, a ruin long claimed by ivy and snow. The roof had fallen in years before, and the moon shone unimpeded onto the cracked altar stone. There Armand placed the bone. Its pale surface glowed faintly, as if drinking the cold light. He spoke then, not in the French of his time, nor in Latin, but in a tongue that tasted of iron and dust upon his lips. The air thickened, and the shadows around the chapel walls began to sway, though no wind stirred. From the dark corners emerged shapes, tall, robed, their faces hidden, yet their eyes burned like embers beneath hoods. They gathered in a circle, silent, waiting. Armand drew a dagger from beneath his cloak. Its blade was etched with the same circles within circles he had seen on Geoffroy's tomb. He turned to Etienne, who stood motionless, understanding at last that he was not merely servant but kin, the bastard branch of the family tree, hidden in the village, called now to complete the bloodline's reckoning. For a heartbeat, Armand faltered. Etienne's eyes, wide but unflinching, met his own. No words were spoken. The moonlight poured over them both, and in that frozen moment, Armand understood the truth. To end the curse was not to preserve himself, but to free those yet unborn from the banquet's table. When the dagger fell, the sound was not a cry, but the sharp intake of breath from the robed figures, as though a long hunger had been sated. The bone on the altar cracked, releasing a black dust that spiraled upward before dissolving into the night. The robed shapes faded, one by one, their ember eyes dimming, until only darkness remained. Armand stood alone beneath the moon. The cold no longer bit his skin. The weight in his chest had lifted, though the price carved itself deep into his heart. He left the chapel without looking back, the snow swallowing his footprints within minutes. By spring, the stench that had haunted the chateau was gone. The villagers spoke cautiously of a change in the air, though none dared ask what had occurred. Armand himself was seldom seen, and when he was, the gloves were gone. Skin was whole, his eyes clear, yet those who met his gaze swore there lingered in them a shadow, like the memory of a room in which the candles had all gone out. They say the crypt beneath Chateau de Vaux remains sealed to this day. But on certain winter nights, when the moon hangs low and the air is still, the wind carries with it the faintest echo of chairs sliding back from a long empty table and the hunger waiting. And that, traveler, is the ghastly tale I bring you tonight. You know any chilling stories of the night? Then share them with us in the comments so we can carry them in our hearts all day.